welcome to the Deep Dive. Today you're joining us as we explore a really fascinating connection, the potential influence of ancient Egyptian mythology and, well, religious ideas on later traditions around the world. We're talking about things like stories of great floods, figures like the patriarchs, and even some, surprising echoes in the Book of Revelation and Christian beliefs.
And to guide us, we'll be drawing from a pretty compelling source, excerpts from Gerald Massey's Ancient Egypt, The Light of the World, Volume 2. Massey was, well, he was definitely a deep thinker.
He certainly was, and his work opens up some genuinely intriguing possibilities.
Absolutely.
So our mission for you today is basically to dig into these surprising parallels and see if we can uncover some potential ancient Egyptian roots for stories and concepts that might feel, well, very familiar. Okay, let's jump right in with a story that pops up in so many cultures. The Great Flood. What did the ancient Egyptians actually believe about a global deluge?
That's a great place to start. Massey points out that the Egyptian version wasn't always about a literal, worldwide flood like we might picture it.
Okay.
In some interpretations, it was seen more as a subsidence of the country and crucially linked to what they called the celestial waters of Nun.
None.
Yeah.
Right, that primordial watery abyss that existed before creation.
Exactly. So maybe not a massive rainstorm, but more of a cosmic, watery shift.
Celestial waters. That's a different angle. And here's something I found interesting. The ark in these Egyptian accounts came in different sizes, 4, 7, and 8 cubits. Those numbers feel significant, don't they?
Oh, absolutely. Massey argues these weren't just random measurements at all.
Right.
Think about 4, it could represent the 4 cardinal points, maybe the entirety of space. 7, well, that's often linked to the moon, maybe a quarter of its 28 phases, or perhaps the heavens in 7 divisions.
Okay, that makes sense.
And the 8-cubit arc seems to appear with the emergence of Tot, the moon god, after this sort of watery chaos period.
So the moon itself acting as a kind of ark of safety after a cosmic flood. That's a really powerful image. Does that resonate, with other traditions?
It really does. Massey points out that in Hawaiian mythology, their deluge is actually called the flood of the moon.
Huh, no kidding.
Yeah. And there's a Hebrew legend where paradise was supposedly spared from a flood because it rested on a mountain so high it reached the moon.
Wow.
It's fascinating how this celestial body keeps getting linked to survival after some huge watery event. It kind of makes you wonder if ancient cultures saw the moon as this constant, this safe harbor in the otherwise changing skies, in a cosmic sense.
Okay, now here's where it gets really interesting for me. Massey mentions an Egyptian inscription called the Destruction of Mankind. What's that story about?
Right. This inscription tells of a rebellion against Ra, the sun god, the kind of supreme power.
Okay.
And this revolt leads to widespread destruction and a great deluge. It's Autumn Ra, having established himself, confronting this uprising. So it's a narrative of divine conflict before the flood.
So it wasn't just a random natural disaster. It was framed as a consequence of cosmic drama almost.
Precisely. Divine conflict leading to watery chaos.
And this idea of celestial waters causing fear even among the gods themselves, that's not just an Egyptian thing, is it?
Not at all, no. The Assyrian deluge legend also describes these celestial waters rising up, terrifying the gods so much they actually fled.
Fled where?
To the heaven of Anu, which is associated with the region of the pole star. And interestingly, in that tradition, it's Bel, a god linked to the pole star, who's said to have caused the deluge.
So we're definitely seeing a pattern here. Floods connected to shifts in the heavens, especially around the pole star. Why the pole star? Why was that so important in these myths?
Well, think about it. The pole star, because it appeared to be the fixed point, right? The spot everything else revolved around.
Right, the anchor.
Exactly. It held immense significance in ancient astronomy and mythology. Massey's theory is that these deluges were often symbolic of the subsidence and submergence of the pole, essentially a change in the visible pole star over vast, vast stretches of time. It's due to a phenomenon we now call precession.
The Earth's wobble.
That's it, like a spinning top slowing down. Earth's axis has this incredibly slow wobble over thousands of years. Ancient observers would have seen this as the central point of the heavens actually shifting.
Okay, that would feel like a fundamental upheaval.
Absolutely. And the idea you sometimes see of a star falling from heaven also ties into this concept of changing celestial order, a pole star losing its position.
That makes a lot of sense. A shift in that celestial anchor point would be a massive event in how they saw the cosmos. And the early ideas about surviving these cosmic waters weren't always about, building boats, were they?
No, not initially. Massey points out that earlier imagery included things like islands or mounds of earth.
Like ziggurats or temple mounds.
Possibly related, yeah. Almost like artificial hills built to find a stable point above the cosmic ocean. Even the idea of stepping stones in the celestial deep suggests earlier concepts of finding a foothold before the ark as a vessel idea fully developed. They represent these evolving metaphors for survival.
It's fascinating to see how those survival narratives might have evolved, and Massey even mentions legends where these defenses against the water fail because of, well, a faithless woman.
Yes, he cites a Muiscas myth from South America, actually about a figure named Huithica. She's often seen as a sort of wicked first mother type,
Okay.
and she supposedly caused a flood because she disrupted her husband's work, couldn't keep a secret, basically messed things up. This theme of human failings contributing to watery chaos seems to echo in different places.
Interesting connection. Okay, let's maybe shift gears now to those incredibly long lifespans we read about, attributed to the patriarchs in ancient texts like Genesis.
Right, this is another area where Massey sees a really strong astronomical connection. He links the 7 old ones in Hebrew tradition, the patriarchs, to figures like the 7 rishis in Hindu lunar mythology,
The rishis.
the sages.
Yes, these rishis were seen as observers, measurers of that slow shift of the stars, that precession we just talked about,
Yeah.
using 7 prominent stars near the celestial pole over immense epochs.
So those hundreds, almost thousands of years they supposedly lived might not have been literal years as we count them.
That's Massey's core argument. He suggests these enormous lifespans are symbolic, tied to astronomical cycles, particularly the Great Year, the full cyclic precession, roughly 26,000 years, and also the 28 lunar mansions, the divisions of the moon's path.
28, like the phases.
Sort of, the sections of the sky the moon passes through. He even does a calculation suggesting that the time a patriarch might be associated with each of these lunar stations could equate to over 900 years.
Which lines up remarkably well with the ages given in Genesis, doesn't it? It's like their lives were being measured on a cosmic calendar, not a human one.
Thinking of it as 900 years per lunar station, that completely reframes those numbers. And what about Noah? He lived only 500 years before the flood started, right? Still huge, but less than the others.
Massey sees Noah, too, as an astronomical figure. He suggests Noah represents a phoenix cycle of 500 years.
A phoenix cycle.
Yeah, a period often associated with renewal. He also connects this to the idea of 7 human lifetimes, maybe around 71.5 years each, adding up. So even Noah's lifespan seems to fit within this broader astronomical way of marking huge periods.
Okay, and what about the dramatic reduction in human lifespan after Noah's deluge? You know, from those nearly 1,000-year figures down to a much more earthly 120 years.
Massey interprets that change as more evidence for the astronomical basis. He links that 120-year limit to something called the double hand cycle of the Zodiac cycle.
Zodiac cycle, that's the Egyptian calendar based on the star Sirius, right?
Exactly, so this is serious. So the shortening of lifespans could mirror a shift in how time itself was being tracked and understood, astronomically speaking. Maybe moving from vast precessional ages to cycles tied more closely to observable star patterns like Sirius.
This is all so interconnected. And it's not just the lifespans, but the number 7 keeps cropping up with these early figures.
Absolutely. Massey talks about the concept of 7 rulers of the world who represent successive pole stars over these vast periods, each star having a kind of reign lasting roughly 3,000 to 4,000 years, which is about 1/7 of that great precessional cycle.
Okay, dividing the big cycle.
Right, and he finds echoes of this 7-fold pattern elsewhere, like the Japanese 7 gods of fortune.
And what about the Hebrew and Babylonian stories of, I think it's 7 and 10 antediluvian kings or rulers?
He sees those as corresponding to similar lists in Babylonian legends, representing rulers in what he calls the foreworld of astronomical mythology, figures who existed in a prior cosmic age mapped onto the stars.
Got it.
Even the Egyptian idea of 7 fishmen rising from the Nun, which they geographically linked to the Persian Gulf form. Massey interprets that as another symbolic representation of these ancient pole star rulers emerging over vast epochs.
Okay, wow. We've looked at floods and patriarchs through this really fascinating Egyptian astronomical lens. Now let's turn to what might be the most, I don't know, surprising connection of all. The potential links between ancient Egyptian wisdom and the Book of Revelation, This sounds like,
Yeah.
well, potentially controversial territory.
It is indeed. Massey makes a very strong case that the Book of Revelation draws heavily, significantly, from ancient Egyptian mythology and especially its eschatology.
Eschatology, the beliefs about the end times, judgment, the afterlife.
Exactly. Particularly the mystery surrounding Amenta, the Egyptian concept of the underworld, the realm of the dead, but also of testing and rebirth.
Okay, give us some specific examples. What parallels does Massey identify?
Well, one really striking one is the lake of fire described in Revelation.
Yeah, very memorable image.
Massey connects this directly to the tank of flame depicted in the Egyptian Book of the Dead, or the rituals, where the enemies of Osiris, the god of the afterlife, are utterly destroyed, annihilated. It's a very similar picture of fiery judgment for the wicked.
Okay, that's pretty direct. What about the plagues? The plagues in Exodus and then the plagues in Revelation. Any connection there, according to Massey?
He suggests something interesting. He thinks the plagues mentioned in the Egyptian rituals in the context of Amenta were originally directed against the Typhonians.
Draconians, meaning?
Symbolic forces of chaos and evil within Amenta, associated with the god Set or Typhon, not necessarily aimed at the historical people of Egypt.
Okay.
So he proposes that the 7 mystical plagues in Revelation might be a later adaptation or reinterpretation of this older Egyptian concept of divine afflictions against cosmic evil forces.
And the wilderness. That's another setting that appears in both the Exodus story and Revelation. Is that just a common backdrop, or is there a deeper link?
Massey believes it's deeper. He argues the wilderness in both contexts often refers symbolically to the desert of Amenta, that liminal space of testing and transformation in Egyptian belief.
Okay.
He points out that in the rituals, the clothed, meaning the righteous souls, the justified dead, were sustained in this wilderness by a divine provision called a kahan.
Kahan.
Yeah, which he equates directly to the Hebrew manna. And the imagery you find in Exodus of their clothes and shoes not wearing out, that also aligns with descriptions of the blessed dead receiving divinely provided garments for their journey in the Egyptian afterlife.
That's a very specific parallel.
Oh.
Wow. And what about serpents? Snakes are everywhere in these stories. Egypt certainly had its share.
Oh, indeed. Massey really highlights the dual nature of the serpent in Egyptian symbolism. You have Apap, or Apap, the huge serpent of darkness and chaos representing evil and death.
The enemy of Ra.
Exactly. But then you also have the Uraeus, the cobra, which is a powerful symbol of royal authority, life, protection, often seen on the brow of pharaohs and deities associated with the sun.
Good snake, bad snake.
Basically, yes. He connects the fiery serpent of the wilderness in the Hebrew story, the one that bites the Israelites, more with the negative Epap figure. But then the act of lifting up the bronze serpent on a pole that becomes a solar symbol of healing, aligning more with the protective, life-giving aspect of the Uraeus.
Huh. Okay. Even seemingly negative figures later on might have surprising origins. Massey mentions an ass-headed god.
Yeah.
That sounds unusual.
Yes, he discusses a deity called Ayu, or sometimes Iu, who is depicted with an ass's head in some scenes of Amenta. Now, later on, the ass got some negative associations in certain cultures, but Massey argues that this figure, who is actually linked to Adamra, the creator sun god,
Okay.
was actually one of the early forms or aspects of the deity worshipped by the early Israelites. He suggests the later mockery or denigration of an ass-headed god might stem from a misunderstanding or perhaps even an intentional distortion of its original Egyptian significance.
Fascinating. What about the imagery of mountains and thrones in Revelation? The Mount Zion, the throne in heaven. Do those have Egyptian parallels in Massey's view?
He thinks so. Massey connects the Mount of Glory in Revelation to the sacred mountain of Amenta in Egyptian belief, often called Manu or Baku, which was a place of sunrise, assembly, judgment, divine manifestation.
Right.
And the throne in heaven, surrounded by those 24 elders, he suggests that could have roots in the Egyptian concept of the pot, the company of the gods, the primordial old ones, and perhaps blended with Babylonian ideas of the 12 zodiacal signs doubled as celestial judges.
24.
12 doubled. Okay.
And even the structure, the 7 halls or pylons in the great house of Osiris and Amenta, finds a potential echo in the 7 churches addressed in Revelation.
And the big final judgment scene in Revelation, we're weighing souls, separating good and evil. Does Massey see that reflected in Egyptian afterlife beliefs? Oh, absolutely. He draws very direct parallels between the final judgment described in Revelation and the famous judgment scene depicted in the Book of the Dead, where the heart of the deceased is weighed in the balance against the feather of Mot, truth and justice.
Weighing of the heart ceremony.
Exactly. And the righteous are justified and allowed into the presence of Osiris, while the wicked are condemned, often devoured. The roles of Osiris, or Otum Ra, as the ultimate judge, are key here.
What about that incredibly powerful image, the sealed with 7 seals in Revelation? What Egyptian concept might possibly connect to that?
Massey links this to the legendary Book of Thoth. Thoth was the god of wisdom, writing, magic.
Describe God.
Right, and his book was believed to contain profound ancient wisdom, maybe the 7 great mysteries of Amenta, or perhaps knowledge related to the 7 sacred festivals. Massey sees it as a kind of archetypal book of revelation, containing knowledge of cosmic cycles, divine secrets, kept sealed until the appointed time.
And the mysterious 2 witnesses mentioned in Revelation. Any figures in Egyptian lore they might mirror?
Massey suggests they could be mirrored in figures like Tot-An, an aspect of Thoth, and Anup, or Anubis, the jackal-headed god. Both often appear as crucial witnesses, recorders, or guardians in Egyptian judgment scenes. Even the dramatic casting out of the dragon, that old serpent Satan from heaven in Revelation, that clearly echoes the perpetual cosmic battle in Egyptian mythology, where the forces of light and order, led by Ra or Horus, overcome the serpent of chaos, Apap.
It's like uncovering this hidden layer of meaning, almost like decoding familiar texts. And the idea of a new heaven in Revelation.
Massey proposes that this concept might have evolved from earlier Egyptian ideas about the structure of the heavens. They conceived of it in different layers or divisions, sometimes 7, sometimes 10, even 12, maybe reflecting a developing cosmology.
Right.
And it's fascinating, even the warnings at the very end of Revelation about not adding to or taking away from the words of the prophecy.
Yeah, very stern warnings.
Massey finds a parallel in the strict rubrical instructions found within the Egyptian rituals, the Book of the Dead, emphasizing the importance of preserving the sacred texts exactly, not altering their spells or content, keeping them secret sometimes.
Wow. It's not just the big themes then, but even specific imagery or textual details seem to have these potential ancient roots. Like Massey mentions depictions of 7 individuals with bread and fish in early Christian art.
Yeah, he suggests that imagery might actually derive from offering scenes related to the 7 mansions, or arits, which were gates or halls the deceased had to pass through in Amenta. Offerings of food, definitely including loaves of bread, were essential. He even notes that 8 loaves were considered a particularly sacred number in some Egyptian contexts.
7 people, 8 loaves. Interesting numbers. And even the timing. The timing of major Christian holidays like Christmas and Easter, could those have connections to ancient Egyptian beliefs and calendars?
Massey certainly suggests it. He points to possible links with the 2 primary births or rebirths of Horus, the sun god, one often associated with the winter solstice, think Christmas, and another with the spring equinox, think Easter.
The 2 Horus festivals.
Right, potentially influenced over long periods by that slow shift, the precession of the equinoxes. He also draws clear parallels between the core Osirian myth, the death and resurrection of Osiris, and the Christian narrative of Jesus' death and resurrection, including even the 40-day period of mourning for Osiris, potentially influencing the development of Lent.
40 days again, and even our weekly holy days. Sunday, the Sabbath.
Massey posits that Egyptian festivals held regularly, often tied to lunar phases like the 1st, 6th, 7th, and 15th days of the month, could have influenced the later development of both the Jewish Sabbath and the Christian Sunday. He specifically points out that in some Egyptian traditions, Horus's own sacred day, his Sabbath, was observed on the 7th day.
This is genuinely eye-opening stuff. Now, let's maybe delve into some of the more specific parallels Massey draws between key Egyptian figures like Horus and the figures we see in the Gospels, primarily Jesus.
Okay. Well, one of the most striking and perhaps controversial parallels Massey highlights is the figure of Horus. In some Egyptian traditions, Horus is depicted as being essentially fatherless, conceived magically, and born of a virgin mother often named Mary or Nut.
Mary sounds like Mary.
The similarity is noted, yes. It presents a clear echo, Massey argues, of the virgin birth narrative of Jesus.
And the dove. The dove is a symbol of the Holy Spirit descending on Jesus. Where might that come from?
Massey traces that symbolism back further, suggesting it originated with the female spirit of life in Egyptian thought, often associated with Mot or Hathor, representing Mother Nature, life breath. Only later, he argues, did that dove symbolism become primarily associated with the male Holy Spirit and the sun god Ra.
Interesting shift. We talked about Amenta, the underworld, having 12 divisions, maybe representing the hours of darkness. Does that number 12 show up significantly in the Gospels or related early Christian texts in a similar context?
Yes, Massey notes those 12 divisions or hours of darkness in the Egyptian underworld journey. He sees a direct reflection of this structure in the 12 dungeons or regions of infernal torment described in the Gnostic text Pistis Sophia.
Ah, Pistis Sophia, right.
He even points to a specific dog-faced demon or tormentor appearing in the Egyptian rituals that bears a strong resemblance to figures described in Pistis Sophia.
Okay. What about the story of the young Jesus teaching in the temple at 12 years old?
Massey highlights the Egyptian tradition of the child god Horus being recognized as a powerful teacher, possessing great wisdom even at a young age, specifically around 12 years old. He parallels this directly with the gospel account of Jesus in the temple. He also mentions other youthful sages in Egyptian lore, like Ebu-Hetep, who are known for their wisdom. And interestingly, there are even non-canonical apocryphal gospels that describe miracles performed by the child Jesus during his supposed time in Egypt.
Right, the flight into Egypt. The Mount of Olives is a very significant location in the Gospels, especially associated with Jesus' teaching. Does it have any Egyptian precedent in Massey's research?
Massey connects it directly to the Egyptian Mount Baku. Baku is described as the Mount of the Olive Tree, the Mountain of Sunrise in the east.
The Olive Tree Mountain.
Yes, and it's a place where Horus is sometimes depicted as a teacher or being enthroned or battling darkness. The parallels in location and function are quite strong, he argues.
The whole concept of incarnation, a divine being taking on human form. Does Massey find roots for that specific idea in Egyptian belief?
He points to the Egyptian belief in divine essence being transmitted, incarnated, through the bloodline of the Virgin Mother as a potential early expression of this complex theological idea.
Okay, there's that well-known scene of the young Jesus saying he must be about his father's business. Does Massey find a parallel for that kind of sentiment?
He does. He connects it to imagery of the child Horus being depicted as diligently engaged in sowing seed for Osiris, Osiris being his divine father, associated with agriculture, fertility, the cycle of life and death.
Sowing seed.
Right. So, just as Horus works for his father in the fields of Amenta, Jesus is depicted as sowing the seed of the divine word for his father. Massey even sees Sut, or Set, the traditional adversary of Horus who tries to steal the harvest, as a potential prototype for the opposing forces, the devil figure Jesus faces.
And the descriptions we find of Jesus embodying both the word logos and the power of God, does that duality resonate with Egyptian concepts surrounding Horus?
Massey argues it mirrors aspects of Horus quite closely. In some interpretations, Horus represents the divine word or utterance that comes forth from the Virgin Mother. In another sense, he embodies the power, the efficacy, the glory of his resurrected father, Osiris. Massey sees these two aspects, word and power, as being uniquely fused together in the figure of Jesus.
Okay. And the idea of Jesus acting as a paraclete, an advocate, an intercessor between humanity and God the Father. Does that specific role have an Egyptian antecedent in Horus?
Yes, Massey definitely sees Horus in his role as the champion, the vindicator, the avenger of his father Osiris as functioning like a paraclete figure. He's the one who argues the case for the righteous dead, introduces them, and advocates for them before the ultimate divine authority, Osiris. He acts as that crucial intermediary, much like Jesus is portrayed as interceding with the Father.
Even the miracles attributed to Jesus healing the sick, making the blind see, even raising the dead like Lazarus. Does Massey see potential origins for these specific types of miracles in Egyptian beliefs?
He suggests that these powerful acts of healing and resurrection could well be rooted in the mysteries and the symbolic eschatological representations associated with Horus, or another related figure, Iusa, within Amenta. Overcoming blindness, illness, and death were central themes in the soul's journey and demonstrations of divine power in that realm.
So maybe symbolic actions in the underworld myths becoming literal miracles in the later stories.
That's essentially the idea he puts forward, yes. A transformation from mythological representation to historical seeming event.
Okay. The famous story of Jesus feeding the multitudes, the loaves and fishes. Any Egyptian parallels there?
Massey points to depictions of the god Ra in Anu Heliopolis, the city of the sun, which was known in Egyptian texts as the place of multiplying bread.
Place of multiplying bread.
Yes. And Ra is often shown there with 7 loaves, symbolizing abundance. Massey sees this as a potential symbolic precursor to the gospel miracle. He contrasts the Egyptian setting, Anu, with the gospel accounts usually taking place on a mountainside in Judea, suggesting a possible transfer of a symbolic motif to a new geographical context. He also notes depictions in the ritual of figures reclining on grass during sacred meals in Amenta.
Huh. Okay. What about the seemingly impossible act of Jesus walking on water?
Massey proposes that this might be a later, more literalized misunderstanding of ancient Egyptian descriptions, specifically descriptions of the solar god, Ra or Horus, traversing the waters of the underworld, the lake of darkness in his celestial bark, his boat, not literally walking on the surface.
So crossing the water in a boat, misinterpreted as walking on the water.
That's his suggestion for how that image might have evolved.
In the 40-day fast Jesus undertook in the wilderness, facing temptation, does that resonate with anything Egyptian?
Massey connects that duration, 40 days, directly to the typical mourning and embalming period for Osiris. It represents Osiris's symbolic burial as seed in the earth and the netherworld of Amenta before his resurrection.
40 days again, yeah.
And it also parallels the prolonged struggles depicted between Horus and his adversary Sut, or Set, which often take place in the desert, the wilderness.
Oh, and the raising of Lazarus. That's such a pivotal, dramatic miracle in the Gospel of John.
Massey finds numerous really striking parallels between the Lazarus story and the resurrection ceremony or rituals associated with Osiris.
Such as?
Well, the deceased figure being called forth aloud by name, being divested of his funerary wrappings or garments, and crucially, the presence of two significant female figures mourning in the Egyptian myth. It's the sisters Isis and Nephthys, whom Massey equates directly with Mary and Martha in the Lazarus story.
The two sisters.
Exactly. He even notes that the ancient writer Plutarch records a 4-day mourning period, the mourning of the goddess, associated with Osiris, which aligns perfectly with Lazarus being explicitly described as having been in the tomb for 4 days.
4 days. Wow, that's specific.
It is.
What about the image of the angel rolling away the stone from Christ's tomb?
Massey sees a clear parallel there in the Egyptian myth of Shu, the god of air and light, who is depicted literally uplifting the sky, separating earth and heaven, when Osiris or Horus is resurrected and emerges from the underworld, the Duat.
Shu lifting the sky. Okay. And even the mystery surrounding Jesus' missing body from the tomb.
That might echo, Massey suggests, the Egyptian tradition where the physical body of Osiris, after being dismembered by Set, was never fully recovered or found in one piece. Isis reassembles him, but the physical completeness is lost, emphasizing the spiritual nature of the resurrection.
The close relationship Jesus had with his followers, and particularly the sisters Mary and Martha, was that kind of dynamic, significant in the Osirian myth cycle.
Massey definitely sees Mary and Martha as mirroring the absolutely crucial and close association of Horus with his mother Isis and his aunt Nephthys. These two goddesses are powerful, protective, and essential figures throughout the myth.
Right. And what about the accounts after the resurrection, where Jesus appears and disappears and is sometimes recognized and sometimes not recognized by his own followers?
Massey finds a direct parallel for that mysterious quality in descriptions within the Egyptian Book of the Dead, the rituals. Horus is described there as possessing the divine power to make himself known or unknown, seen or unseen, at will.
He can control his visibility. Okay, even the Last Supper, the final meal Jesus shared with his disciples. Does that resonate with Egyptian imagery?
Massey connects that sacred meal to depictions or texts describing Horus resting at the table of my father Osiris in the blessed afterlife.
At his father's table.
Yes. And Jesus' expressed desire, his prayer, for his followers to be with him where he is and to be with the Father. That finds a very close parallel in Horus's plea for his own followers, his brethren, the righteous souls, to be united with Ra in the celestial realm.
And the figure of Judas, the betrayer, the son of perdition.
Massey links him archetypally to Sut, or Set, the treacherous brother and opponent of Osiris and Horus in the Egyptian myths. He even notes a reference to the negative powers of a place called Nekhen in the ritual, which sounds somewhat like the description of Judas as the son of perdition or destruction in the Gospels.
It's truly astonishing just how many potential connections and parallels Massey lays out between these traditions.
He really does. He goes into great detail, listing numerous other direct parallels in names, titles, specific events, imagery. Things like the woman clothed with the sun, the lamb standing on Mount Zion, the river of life flowing from the throne, the identification of Satan as the old serpent.
All finding echoes in Revelation.
Exactly. And he even argues forcefully for the ancient Egyptian origins of the symbol of the cross itself, long before Christianity.
So, as we kind of bring this deep dive to a close, What would you say is the main takeaway from exploring Massey's work on this?
I think the overwhelming takeaway is simply the sheer number and the specificity of the compelling parallels that Massey uncovers. Between ancient Egyptian mythology, its rituals, its cosmology, and these later hugely influential religious traditions, particularly Judaism and Christianity,
Yeah.
it strongly suggests, at the very least, a significant degree of influence and the potential for very ancient concepts, symbols, and narratives to have been reinterpreted, adapted, and given new meaning over vast periods of time and across cultures.
And some of those specific details are just, well, incredible, aren't they? The astronomical interpretations of the patriarchs' lifespans,
Yeah.
those potential direct links between specific Egyptian rituals and passages in Revelation and the Gospels. It really does make you look at these familiar stories in a completely new light.
Absolutely. This kind of exploration offers a fresh perspective, doesn't it? It prompts us, I think, to consider the deep interconnectedness of ancient human thought and the possible, maybe even probable origins of ideas and stories that we often consider unique to specific traditions or later revelations.
It certainly does that. So for you listening, here may be a final thought to consider as we wrap up. How might the cyclical nature of celestial events, the predictable movements of the stars and planets, the solstices, the equinoxes, that slow wobble of precession, how might those grand cosmic rhythms have fundamentally shaped the development of these recurring mythological themes, these stories of floods, saviors, judgment, and rebirth across so many different cultures and millennia?
Mm-hmm.
And what does it mean, really, if stories and symbols we hold sacred today might have roots reaching back into such ancient universal cosmic observations? Something to think about. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive.